The champagne glass slipped from Amara Thompson's hand, shattering against the museum's marble floor, but she barely registered the sound as she watched the small figure darting through the shadows of the Renaissance gallery. The little boy couldn't have been more than 7, his expensive navy suit torn at the sleeve, his dark eyes wide with terror as he glanced back toward the grand hall where the gala continued in oblivious splendor. Miss Thompson, the Vanderbilt family is still waiting to discuss the Caravaggio acquisition. Director Harrison's clipped voice cut through her alarm. Her supervisor's tone carried the familiar edge of impatience that had become her constant companion during these high-stakes events. She glanced at the ornate clock above the archway. 10:47 p.m. The gala would end in barely an hour, but that child had been running for at least 20 minutes, fear evident in every panicked movement. Every instinct screamed at her to help, even though abandoning Chicago's most prestigious donors could cost her the curator position she'd fought so hard to earn, the career that had finally given her respectability after growing up as the daughter of a convicted embezzler. Then she saw them. 3 men in dark suits moving through the crowd with predatory precision, their hands inside their jackets in a way that made her blood run cold. They weren't museum security. They were hunting. The boy stumbled near a display case, nearly falling against a priceless marble sculpture, and Amara's heart clenched. Without another thought, she smoothed down her burgundy gown and crossed the gallery floor. "Where are you going, Miss Thompson?" Harrison called after her, his voice sharp with warning. "The Vanderbilts are extremely influential. Don't you dare walk away from." She didn't look back. Some things mattered more than career advancement. What Amara didn't know was that across Chicago, the most feared man in the Italian underworld was tearing the city apart looking for that same little boy. And when Dante Moretti finally found his son, he would also discover the woman who had risked everything to keep him safe, a woman who would change everything he thought he knew about power, protection, and what it meant to trust someone with your life. Introduction, character, and world establishment. Amara Thompson had learned long ago that respect had to be earned twice as hard when you carried the weight of your father's crimes on your shoulders. At 29, she'd perfected the art of being brilliant and above reproach, a skill that had served her well at the prestigious Chicago Museum of Art, where she'd risen from assistant curator to head of Renaissance acquisitions in just 5 years. "The Medici collection authentication needs your signature," her assistant Kevin murmured as he slipped past her with a folder of documents. "And Dr. Harrison wants the provenance reports before the board meeting." Amara nodded, accepting the paperwork with practiced efficiency. Tonight's gala was crucial, old money minglers mixing with new tech billionaires, all eager to attach their names to Chicago's cultural legacy. She'd grown accustomed to their calculating glances and carefully worded inquiries, focusing instead on the art itself, the only thing that had never judged her for her father's mistakes. "Thompson." Harrison's voice carried across the gallery, causing several donors to glance up from their champagne flutes. "The Bellini restoration proposal. Why hasn't it been submitted to the Conservation Committee?" Heat flushed Amara's cheeks as she moved swiftly to address his concern. Harrison had been looking for reasons to question her judgment ever since she'd opposed his decision to purchase that questionable Raphael sketch last year. He'd made it clear that he preferred curators who didn't challenge his authority, who stayed in their designated lanes. The gala had been running smoothly all evening, and now the crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors as Chicago's elite admired Renaissance masterpieces behind velvet ropes. The museum's architecture was a study in elegant contrast, classical columns meeting modern security, history preserved in climate-controlled perfection. That's why the child running through the galleries stood out so starkly. Amara first noticed him around 10:15, when he'd burst through the service entrance near the restoration wing. She'd assumed he was the son of one of the catering staff, perhaps exploring where he shouldn't. But as the minutes passed and she watched him move with increasing desperation from gallery to gallery, her concern grew. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with delicate features and perfectly styled dark hair now disheveled from his flight. His clothes, a designer suit jacket, and what looked like private school uniform pants, were expensive enough to belong to any of the donor families present. But it was his expression that broke her heart, Pure, undiluted terror. Small shoulders hunched, as if expecting a blow. Tear-stained cheeks catching the gallery lighting. Tiny hands pressed against his mouth to stifle sobs as he peered around corners, clearly searching for somewhere to hide. Amara. Harrison's sharp tone made her startle. Stop watching the crowd and focus on your responsibilities. The Rothschild party specifically requested your expertise on the Botticelli, and they've been waiting 15 minutes. She forced herself to turn toward the donors, but the image of the terrified child burned in her mind. As she discussed brushwork techniques and Renaissance symbolism with people who saw art as investment portfolios, she kept glancing toward the galleries, hoping to see a relieved parent rushing to embrace the boy. Instead, she watched him grow more desperate with each passing moment, his small frame trembling as he pressed himself into the shadows between display cases. By 10:30, Amara couldn't stand it anymore. The child had been running for nearly half an hour, and those men in dark suits were systematically checking every gallery, their movements coordinated like a military operation. Where were his parents? Why was no one helping him? She approached Harrison during a brief moment when he was alone. There's a child in distress in the East Wing. I think he might be lost or... Not our concern, Harrison interrupted without looking up from his phone. Security handles wandering children. Your concern is maintaining relationships with donors who write 7-figure checks. But there are men following him, and they don't look like... Miss Thompson. Harrison's tone turned glacial. Your job is to curate art and charm donors, not play security guard. The museum has protocols for these situations. Get back to the Vanderbilt party. Now. Amara bit back her response, but her eyes drifted back to the Renaissance gallery. Through the archway, she could see the little boy huddled behind a statue of Apollo, his small body shaking with silent sobs. At 10:45, as she was explaining the significance of sfumato technique to a banker's wife who clearly wasn't listening, she heard it, a sound that cut through the quartet's string music and the gala's polite conversation. A child's terrified cry, quickly muffled. That's when she saw him stumble in the gallery entrance, those 3 men converging on his position with frightening speed. One of them spoke into a radio device. Another's hand moved inside his jacket. Amara's decision was instant and absolute. She excused herself from the conversation, set down her champagne flute, and walked directly toward the Renaissance gallery. Not running, that would draw attention, but moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had every right to be exactly where she was going. Where do you think you're going? Harrison's voice followed her, sharp with warning. Thompson, the Vanderbilts are waiting. If you walk away from them, there will be consequences. There's a child who needs help, she said without turning around, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You walk into that gallery and interfere with museum security protocol, and you're finished here, Harrison said coldly. Do you understand me, Thompson? Finished. Amara's hand touched the doorframe of the Renaissance gallery. She needed this job desperately. Her reputation had been built on years of proving she was nothing like her father, that she could be trusted with priceless artifacts and institutional responsibility. One wrong move, one hint of poor judgment, and she'd be right back where she started, defined by someone else's crimes. But through the doorway, she could see the boy's face, and in his terrified eyes, she saw something that decided everything, the same desperate hope she'd felt at 9 years old, watching her father being led away in handcuffs, praying someone, anyone, would step forward and make it stop. She'd spent 20 years building walls between herself and chaos, choosing safety and respectability over every reckless instinct. But not tonight. Not for this. She stepped into the gallery and closed the door behind her, the sound of it clicking shut somehow final, like a door closing on her old life and opening onto something she couldn't yet see. Some moments demanded courage over caution. And as those 3 dangerous men turned their attention toward her, Amara Thompson was about to discover exactly how much courage she possessed and what price she'd pay for it. The Renaissance gallery was quieter than the main hall, the thick walls muffling the gala's ambient noise to a distant hum. Amara's heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved deeper into the room, her eyes scanning the shadows between display cases and sculptures. Hello, she called softly, keeping her voice gentle. Sweetheart, I'm here to help you. A small whimper came from behind the marble statue of Apollo. Amara approached slowly, her hands visible and open, the way you might approach a frightened animal. When she rounded the sculpture, she found him, pressed into the corner, his expensive suit jacket torn at the shoulder, his dark eyes enormous with terror. It's okay, she murmured, crouching down despite her evening gown. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you. The boy said something in rapid Italian, his voice breaking on a sob. Amara didn't speak the language, but she understood fear. She understood the way his small body trembled, the way he kept glancing toward the gallery entrance, the way his breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. Sure, she soothed, reaching out slowly. When he didn't pull away, she touched his shoulder gently.
I'm Amara.
What's your name? El Luca, he managed, then more Italian words tumbled out, desperate and pleading. Voices echoed from the corridor outside, men's voices, speaking in low tones that somehow carried more menace than shouting would have. Amara's heart kicked into overdrive. They were close. Too close. She made a decision in that split second, one that would change everything. Come with me, she whispered, holding out her hand. Quickly. Vieni con me. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Luca grabbed her hand with both of his small fingers ice cold despite the museum's perfect climate control. Amara pulled him up and led him swiftly across the gallery, not toward the main entrance, but toward an unobtrusive door in the far wall, one that most visitors never noticed. She pressed her security badge against the reader, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. The archive room beyond was small, windowless, filled with climate-controlled storage cases containing works awaiting authentication or restoration. More importantly, it wasn't on the standard security patrol route. In here, Amara whispered, guiding Luca inside. She positioned him behind a large storage cabinet, then pressed her finger to her lips. Stay quiet.
Silenzio.
I'll come back for you. Luca nodded, his eyes still wide with fear, but there was something else there now, a flicker of trust that made Amara's chest tighten with protective fury toward whoever had frightened a child this badly. She stepped back into the gallery just as the door from the main corridor swung open. 3 men entered, and Amara's trained eye cataloged details automatically. Expensive suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of shoulder holsters, the way they moved with coordinated precision, the cold assessment in their eyes as they scanned the room. Can I help you, gentlemen? Amara asked, injecting warmth into her voice while positioning herself between them and the archive door. I'm afraid this gallery is temporarily closed for the evening. The tallest one, with a scar along his jawline, stepped forward. His hand rested inside his jacket in a way that made her pulse spike with adrenaline. We're looking for a boy. 7 years old, dark hair, wearing a blue suit. Have you seen him? Amara arranged her features into polite confusion, calling on every ounce of composure she'd cultivated over years of dealing with difficult donors. A child? No, I haven't seen any unaccompanied children in this wing. Are you family? I can alert security to help. That won't be necessary, another man interrupted, his accent thick. Where does that door lead? He gestured toward the archive entrance. Storage and conservation, Amara replied smoothly. Climate-controlled archives. No public access. The boy probably went toward the sculpture garden. That's where children usually wander during events. She could feel their suspicion, see it in the way they exchanged glances, in the tension radiating from their bodies. For a moment, she thought they might push past her, search the archives anyway. Her mind raced, calculating how she could delay them, what she could do if they found Luca. The sculpture garden is through the west corridor, the scarred man asked, though his eyes never left her face, searching for any tell, any crack in her composure. Yes, past the impressionist wing and through the double doors. Amara gestured in that direction, praying her hand remained steady. Would you like me to show you? Another exchange of glances. Then the scarred man nodded curtly.
No.
We'll find it. They filed out, moving with that same predatory coordination, and Amara forced herself to remain still, to not sag with relief, to not look back at the archive door. She counted to 60 in her head, then walked calmly to the gallery entrance and peered into the corridor. Empty. She returned to the archive room, her legs suddenly weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. Luca was exactly where she'd left him, trembling behind the storage cabinet. When he saw her, he rushed forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, sobbing into the ornate beading of her gown. "It's okay," Amara whispered, stroking his hair with gentle hands. "You're safe now. They're gone."
Sei al sicuro.
She had no idea how she was going to explain this to Harrison. No idea what she'd stumbled into. No idea. The archive door opened. Amara spun around, instinctively pushing Luca behind her, ready to put herself between him and whatever threat had found them. But the man who stepped into the room made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in the Renaissance paintings she curated. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, olive skin, and eyes so dark they were nearly black. He wore a perfectly tailored 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but it was the way he carried himself that stopped her heart. Absolute authority, barely controlled violence, and something else, something that made the air in the small room feel electric.
Luca.
His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of mountains, of storms, of terrible relief.
Papa.
Luca darted around Amara, and the transformation in the man's face was startling. The cold fury melted into naked vulnerability as he dropped to his knees and caught his son, gathering the boy against his chest with desperate tenderness. They spoke in rapid Italian, the man's hands moving over Luca's face, his arms, checking for injuries with a care that contradicted everything about his dangerous appearance. Then those dark eyes lifted to meet Amara's, and the intensity of his gaze made her feel pinned, examined, assessed. "You hit him," he said, his English accented but precise. It wasn't a question. Amara lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. He was terrified. "Those men were mine," the man interrupted, standing with Luca held against his shoulder. Looking for him, not trying to harm him. The relief that flooded through Amara was immediately replaced by confusion, then a creeping sense of having made a terrible mistake. Then why was he running from them? Because he's 7 and scared and in a strange place. The man stepped closer, and Amara caught a scent that seemed impossible in the sterile archive. Expensive cologne and something else, something that spoke of power and danger. "My men wouldn't have hurt him. But you didn't know that. You saw a frightened child and 3 dangerous men, and you chose to protect him." It still wasn't clear if she was in trouble or being thanked. Anyone would have.
No.
He cut her off, his gaze never wavering. Most people would have looked away.
Called security.
Protected themselves. Another step closer. "You lied to armed men to keep a stranger's child safe. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Amara's mouth went dry. Up close, she could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the way his jaw was clenched with tension, the slight tremor in his hands that suggested he'd been running on pure adrenaline and terror. This was a man who'd been through hell tonight, and she'd inadvertently been both the cause and the solution. "I'm Dante Moretti," he said quietly, and something in his tone suggested she should recognize the name. "And you've just saved my entire world." He held out his free hand, and Amara found herself taking it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, the way his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, awareness, attraction, and something deeper she couldn't name. "Amara Thompson," she managed, suddenly very aware of how small the archive room was, how close they were standing, how his dark eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. "Amara," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his accent made something flutter in her chest. "We need to talk." Amara's hands shook as she poured coffee the next morning, the events of the previous night, playing on an endless loop in her mind. After Dante Moretti had escorted Luca out through the museum's private entrance, avoiding both the gala guests and his own security team, he'd pressed a card into her hand with nothing but a phone number embossed in silver.
No.
Explanation, no threat, just those dark eyes holding hers for a moment too long before he disappeared into the Chicago night. Harrison had fired her on the spot, of course, in front of the Vanderbilts and half the board of directors. The humiliation still burned. You look like hell, Marcus observed from her tiny kitchen table, his textbooks spread across the surface. Her younger brother was supposed to be studying for his political science midterm, but instead he watched her with the concerned expression he'd worn since they were kids, and she'd become more parent than sister. Thanks, Amara muttered, carrying her coffee to the couch of her modest Lincoln Park apartment. The contrast between her cramped one-bedroom and the opulence of last night's museum gala felt almost absurd now. You really know how to make a girl feel better. I'm serious, Mara. You've barely slept. And you lost your job over some random kid? Marcus closed his textbook. That's not like you. You never take risks like that. Because I spent my whole life watching Dad's risks destroy everything, Amara thought but didn't
say.
Instead, she opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing. Dante Moretti, Chicago. The search results made her coffee turn bitter in her mouth. Philanthropist. Art collector. Major donor to the Chicago Symphony, the Lyric Opera, 3 hospitals. Owner of Moretti Imports, a shipping and logistics company with operations throughout the Midwest and Mediterranean. Photos of him at charity galas, always impeccably dressed, always with that same controlled expression she'd seen shatter when he held his son. But buried in the results, in the comment sections and conspiracy blogs, were the other rumors. Organized crime, the Italian syndicate, connections to everything from gambling to protection, rackets. Nothing ever proven, never even formally investigated, but the whispers were there, persistent, ominous. What are you looking at? Marcus leaned over her shoulder, then whistled low. Holy shit.
Is
that the guy from last night? Mara, I know what he is, Amara said quietly, closing the laptop. Or what people say he is. She spent the rest of the day trying to distract herself, updating her resume, reaching out to contacts at other museums, pretending that losing the position she'd worked 5 years to earn wasn't devastating. By evening, Marcus had left for his study group, and she was alone with her thoughts and a rapidly dwindling bank account. The knock at her door came at 8:47 p.m. Amara checked the peephole and saw a woman she didn't recognize, late 30s, dark hair, pulled into a severe bun, wearing a black suit that screamed expensive and professional. Every instinct told her not to open the door, but curiosity won out. Miss Thompson, the woman asked before Amara could speak. My name is Chiara Russo.
I
work for Dante Moretti. May I come in? Amara's grip tightened on the doorframe. How did you get my address? Mr. Moretti has extensive resources. Chiara's expression remained neutral. I assure you I'm only here to discuss a business opportunity. 5 minutes of your time. Against her better judgment, Amara stepped aside. Chiara moved through the small apartment with the assessing gaze of someone trained to notice details. The art history books stacked on every surface, the framed print of Caravaggio's The Calling of St. Matthew above the couch, the careful way everything was arranged despite the obvious age and wear of the furniture. Mr. Moretti would like to offer you a position, Chiara said, settling onto the couch and withdrawing a leather portfolio from her bag, as private curator for his personal art collection. Amara remained standing, arms crossed. I'm not interested in. The salary is $180,000 annually, with full benefits including health, dental, and vision coverage. Additionally, a housing allowance and a discretionary budget for continuing education.
Chiara.
Slid a contract across the coffee table. The position would involve cataloging and maintaining Mr. Moretti's collection, advising on acquisitions, and managing preservation protocols. The number made Amara's breath catch. It was more than double what she'd been making at the museum. Enough to not just survive, but actually live, to help Marcus with his remaining tuition, to stop counting every dollar. Why me? Amara asked, not touching the contract. I'm sure he could hire any number of more experienced curators. Mr. Moretti values integrity above credentials. Last night you demonstrated something he rarely encounters, genuine compassion combined with courage. Chiara's expression softened.
Slightly.
He also believes in rewarding loyalty, and you've already proven yourself loyal to what matters most to him. Amara's mind raced. The offer was too good, too convenient, too perfectly timed to be anything but suspicious. What's the catch? There is no catch. You would be an employee, nothing more. Your duties would be strictly professional.
Chiara paused.
Though I should mention that the collection is housed at Mr. Moretti's private estate, and given certain security considerations, you would be assigned a protection detail for your safety. Security considerations, Amara repeated flatly. You mean because of what he really does? Because he's a businessman with valuable assets and enemies who might seek to exploit any perceived weakness. Chiara's tone remained maddeningly neutral. Whether you choose to accept the position or not, Mr. Moretti feels responsible for your current unemployment. He would like to ensure you land somewhere appropriate. The careful phrasing didn't escape Amara's notice. This wasn't just a job offer, it was compensation for a problem Dante Moretti had inadvertently created. Or perhaps insurance that she wouldn't talk about what she'd witnessed, who she'd helped. I need to think about it, Amara said. Of course. Mr. Moretti expected as much. Chiara stood, leaving the contract on the table.
You
have 48 hours to decide. My number is on the card. One more thing, the collection includes several pieces you might find interesting. A Titian that's been missing from academic records since 1943. A Bernini sculpture that was thought destroyed. Mr. Moretti acquired them through legitimate means, but they've never been publicly authenticated. You would be the first scholar to examine them in decades. The calculated appeal to her professional curiosity was blatant, but God help her, it worked. Amara felt her resolve wavering as she imagined getting her hands on lost masterpieces, contributing to art historical knowledge in ways most curators only dreamed of. After Chiara left, Amara sat on her couch staring at the contract until Marcus came home near midnight. You're still up? He dropped his backpack, then noticed the papers spread across the coffee table. What's all this? Amara explained, watching her brother's expression shift from curiosity to concern to outright alarm. Absolutely not, Marcus said when she finished. Mara, you can't seriously be considering working for the mob. We don't know that he's. Everyone knows what he is. They just can't prove it. Marcus sat beside her, his voice urgent. Do you remember what it was like when Dad got arrested? The looks, the whispers, the way people treated us? You spent years rebuilding your reputation, proving you're not like him.
and
Now you want to throw it away working for someone who makes Dad look like a shoplifter? The comparison stung because it was exactly what had been gnawing at her all day. Her father's fraud conviction when she was 9 had defined her entire adolescence. She'd built her career on being above reproach, on choosing the safe, respectable path at every turn. It's different, Amara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Dante hasn't been convicted of anything. These are just rumors. Rumors don't usually come with security details, Marcus shot back. This is dangerous, and
you know it.
these people, they're not like us. They play by different rules. You get involved with them, and it won't matter how many Renaissance paintings you catalog. You'll be one of
Them.
His words echoed in her mind long after he'd gone to bed. Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Dante had held Luca, the devastating tenderness in those dangerous hands, the way he'd looked at her in that archive room, as if she were something rare and precious, the way her heart had stuttered when he'd said her name. She was rationalizing, and she knew it, telling herself it was about the art, about the opportunity, about the financial security, not about the magnetic pull of a man who seemed to exist in the space between civilized sophistication and barely restrained violence, not about the thrill of stepping outside the careful boundaries she'd maintained for 20 years. At 2 a.m., Amara picked up her phone and dialed the number on Chiara's card. "I accept," she said when the woman answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "But I want to see the collection first, before I sign anything." "Of course. Mr. Moretti expected you would. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll send a car." The car that arrived the next afternoon was a sleek black Mercedes, the kind that drew stares in her middle-class neighborhood. The driver was professionally courteous and completely silent. During the 40-minute drive north into Lake Forest, where estates hid behind gates and hedges, Dante's home was not what she'd expected. Somehow she'd imagined something ostentatious, dripping with nouveau riche excess. Instead, the sprawling contemporary structure seemed to grow organically from its wooded surroundings, glass and stone and clean lines that spoke of refined taste rather than flashy wealth. Chiara met her at the door and led her through rooms that felt more like a private museum than a residence. Each space was carefully curated, the art displayed with professional lighting and appropriate spacing. Amara's trained eye caught details automatically. The Caravaggio in the entrance hall was absolutely authentic. The Baroque sculpture in the library showed signs of careful restoration. The Renaissance tapestry in the corridor was museum quality. But it was when Chiara opened the doors to the private gallery that Amara forgot every reservation, every warning, every rational reason she should walk away. The room was breathtaking. 2 stories of perfectly lit space, climate-controlled and secure, housing a collection that would make any major museum envious. She moved through it in a daze, cataloging masterpieces, a Botticelli Madonna, a Raphael sketch, a bronze that could only be a lost Donatello. "Welcome to my world, Miss Thompson." Amara turned to find Dante standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. In casual clothes, dark slacks, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he was somehow even more devastating than he'd been in his formal suit. "This collection," she breathed, "it's extraordinary. It could be yours to curate." He moved into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. "If you're brave enough to accept." Amara met his dark eyes, feeling the weight of the choice before her. Every logical reason said no. Her history, her brother's warnings, the rumors that clung to Dante Moretti like shadows. But standing in that gallery, surrounded by centuries of beauty and truth preserved in paint and stone, with this dangerous, complicated man offering her something most curators would kill for. "I already told Chiara yes," Amara said. "I suppose that makes me either very brave or very foolish." A slow smile transformed Dante's face, and Amara felt her heart kick against her ribs. "In my experience," he said quietly, "the two are often indistinguishable." The first month passed in a blur of inventory spreadsheets, authentication reports, and the kind of work that made Amara forget to eat lunch. Dante's collection was even more extensive than that initial gallery tour had revealed. Storage rooms filled with carefully wrapped canvases, climate-controlled vaults housing delicate works on paper, sculptures that hadn't seen daylight in decades. "Miss Amara?" Luca's voice was tentative from the gallery doorway. He'd taken to seeking her out during his after-school hours, drawn by some combination of curiosity and the memory of that night in the museum. Can I watch you work? Amara looked up from the Titian she'd been examining under magnification, struck again by how much the boy resembled his father. The same dark eyes, the same careful reserve that occasionally cracked to reveal vulnerability underneath. Of course, sweetheart. But you have to be very gentle. These paintings are very old and very fragile. Luca approached with the exaggerated caution of a 7-year-old trying to be grown up, his small hands clasped behind his back. Papa says you're making them beautiful again. I'm making sure they stay beautiful, Amara corrected, showing him the conservation report she'd been compiling. See these tiny cracks? That's called craquelure. It happens when paint ages. My job is to document it, make sure it doesn't get worse. Like a doctor, Lucas said thoughtfully. But for paintings, exactly like a doctor. Amara smiled, charmed by his quick understanding. Over the following weeks, these afternoon sessions became routine, Luca doing homework at the gallery table, while Amara worked, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp, hungry intelligence. She learned that his mother had died 2 years ago, that he attended an exclusive private school but had few friends, that he loved reading and astronomy and spoke 3 languages fluently. She learned, too, that he was desperately lonely in this beautiful prison of wealth and security. Your Italian is getting better, Dante observed one evening, appearing in the gallery doorway as Amara was explaining Renaissance perspective techniques to Luca in halting, badly accented Italian. Amara felt her pulse quicken the way it always did when Dante appeared, that involuntary response she'd tried and failed to suppress over the past month. Luca's a patient teacher. She said paintbrush wrong, Luca reported, grinning. She called it a Pinello instead of Pinello. Traitor, Amara said fondly, ruffling his hair. See if I help you with your English homework now. Watching them together, Dante's expression softened into something that made Amara's chest ache. These unguarded moments were rare, glimpses of the man beneath the controlled exterior, the father who would burn the world down to keep his son safe. It's past your bedtime, Piccolino, Dante said. Go wash up. I need to discuss some acquisitions with Ms. Thompson. After Luca left, with a theatrical sigh that made them both smile, Dante moved into the gallery.
Brupe.
He'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look both more dangerous and more approachable. I've been reviewing your authentication reports, he said, pulling up a chair across from her work table. Your analysis of the Titian is brilliant. I had 3 other experts look at it, and none of them caught the inconsistencies in the underdrawing that you found. Amara tried not to feel absurdly pleased by the compliment. The pigment analysis suggests it's from his workshop rather than his hand. Still valuable, still beautiful, but not quite what you thought you'd purchased. And you told me that honestly, even though it devalues the piece considerably. Dante's dark eyes held hers. Most consultants would have glossed over the discrepancies to maintain the higher valuation. I don't lie about art, Amara said simply, even when the truth is inconvenient. No, Dante agreed quietly. You don't lie at all, do you? It's not in your nature. The conversation shifted to potential acquisitions, a Caravaggio coming up for private sale, a disputed Artemisia Gentileschi that Dante wanted her opinion on. She was struck, as she had been repeatedly over the past month, by his genuine knowledge. He didn't just collect art as status symbols. He understood it, could discuss iconography and technique and historical context with the fluency of someone who'd actually studied the material. Where did you learn so much about Renaissance art? Amara asked, curiosity overcoming professional boundaries. My grandmother, Dante said, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. She was from Florence, grew up surrounded by it. She used to tell me that art was civilization's memory, the things we made to prove we were more than just animals fighting over territory. He paused. I think she Hoped if I loved beautiful things enough, I might become a beautiful person. The raw honesty in his voice made Amara's throat tight. She succeeded. Dante's eyes snapped to hers, intense and searching. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, dangerous. Then his phone buzzed, and the spell broke. Over the following weeks, Amara witnessed the full scope of Dante's world. The estate was never without security, discreet but unmistakable men with earpieces and barely concealed weapons, who spoke in low tones and treated Dante with a deference that went beyond normal. Employer-employee respect. They called him boss or sir, and when he gave instructions, they were followed immediately and without question. She attended her first dinner party on a crisp October evening, a gathering of Chicago's elite inn. Dante's formal dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany and silver. The guests were an interesting mix: a federal judge, 2 city councilmen, several prominent businessmen, and their elegantly dressed wives. The conversation flowed in multiple languages: English, Italian, even some French, touching on politics and art and business with the ease of people accustomed to power. But Amara noticed the undertones. The way certain topics were delicately avoided. The quick glances exchanged when someone mentioned shipping contracts or labor negotiations. The careful deference everyone showed Dante, as if he were royalty rather than simply a wealthy host. "Your curator is lovely," one of the wives said to Dante, smiling at Amara with calculated warmth. So refreshing to see someone actually knowledgeable about the collection rather than just hired for decoration. "Miss Thompson is brilliant," Dante replied smoothly. "She's already corrected several misattributions in my collection and saved me from purchasing at least one very expensive forgery." The woman's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How fortunate you found someone so trustworthy." After dinner, as Amara was preparing to leave, she heard Dante's voice from his study, cold and lethal in a way she'd never heard before. "I don't care what Vitali thinks he's entitled to. The answer is no, and if he pushes this issue again, he'll discover exactly how far my patience extends." A pause.
No. No negotiation. He
"Can't accept the current arrangement, or we can discuss it more directly. His choice." Amara stood frozen in the corridor, her blood running cold. This was the other Dante, the one whispered about in those online forums and conspiracy theories. Not the devoted father or the sophisticated art collector, but something harder and infinitely more dangerous. When he emerged from the study, he found her there. His expression shifted from cold fury to something more guarded. "You heard that," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I was just leaving," Amara replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Amara." He stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "I've never lied to you about what I am. I won't apologize for protecting what's mine." "I know." And she did, even as the knowledge settled uncomfortably in her chest. "I should go." She made it halfway to the front door before he called after her. "Wait." Amara turned to find Dante standing in the corridor, backlit by the study lights, his expression unreadable. "Does it frighten you?" he asked quietly. "What I am?" The honest answer was yes and no. Yes, because she understood now that the danger surrounding him wasn't theoretical. No, because she'd also seen him reading bedtime stories to Luca in 3 languages, gently correcting her Italian pronunciation, listening with genuine interest to her theories about Caravaggio's use of chiaroscuro. "It should," Amara said finally. "But somehow it doesn't. Not the way it should." Something flickered in Dante's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He crossed the distance between them in a few strides, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're an extraordinarily brave woman, Amara Thompson," he said, his voice low and rough. "Or an extraordinarily foolish one." I've been told they're often indistinguishable, she managed, her heart hammering. Dante smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask he wore for dinner guests, and it transformed his face from severe to devastating. So you have. He stepped back before she could do something monumentally stupid like reach for him.
Good
Night, Amara. Drive carefully. The moment shattered, but its resonance followed her all the way home. It was Luca who finally put words to what Amara had been sensing for weeks. They were in the library, where she'd been helping him with a school project about family history. Do you like my papa? Luca asked suddenly, his English careful and precise. Amara looked up from the poster board they'd been arranging. Of course I do.
He's my
Employer and…
No.
Luca shook his head, frustration creasing his small forehead as he searched for words. Do you like him? The way people like each other in stories. Heat flooded Amara's cheeks. Luca, that's not. Because Papa likes you. Luca continued, his dark eyes, so like Dante's, watching her. Intently. I can tell. He smiles more now. He laughs sometimes. He didn't before you came. Amara's throat went tight. Your papa has a lot of responsibilities. I'm sure. Mama died protecting me, Luca said quietly, and the sudden shift made Amara go still.
From
bad men who wanted to hurt Papa. She put me in a closet and told me to be quiet, and then… He swallowed hard. Papa is afraid he'll lose me too. That's why the security men are always here. That's why he gets angry when people threaten things. Oh, sweetheart. Amara pulled him into a hug, feeling his small body tremble against hers.
I'm so sorry.
That must have been so scary. Papa says you saved me too, Luca whispered into her shoulder. In the museum.
That you
were brave like Mama. That's why he trusts you. Amara held him tighter, understanding now the weight of what Dante had offered when he'd hired her. Not just a job, but entry into the small, fiercely protected circle of people he allowed.
Close to his son.
Close to himself. It should have made her run. Instead, impossibly, it made her want to stay. The call came at 2:17 a.m., jarring Amara from restless sleep. She fumbled for her phone. Squinting at the screen, Dante's estate, the number Chiara had given her for emergencies. Hello. Her voice came out rough with sleep. Miss Thompson, I apologize for the late hour. It was Mrs. Chun, Luca's nanny, her usually calm voice threaded with stress. Luca is having a difficult night, nightmares, and he's asking for you specifically. Mr. Moretti is in New York on business, and I thought perhaps. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Amara said, already throwing off the covers. She made it in 25, her heart pounding with more than just the urgency of the late night.
Drive.
The security team waved her through the gates without question, and Mrs. Chun met her at the door with obvious relief. He won't let me near him, the older woman said, wringing her hands. He's not violent, just frightened. Calling for his mother, then for you. I didn't know what else to do. Amara found Luca in his bedroom, a space that should have been any child's dream, built in. Bookshelves, a reading nook with cushioned window seats, glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged on the ceiling in actual constellations. But the boy himself was huddled in the corner. Beside his bed, knees drawn to his chest, tears streaming down his face as he rocked slightly. Luca, Amara said softly, kneeling a few feet away. It's me. It's Amara. You're safe, sweetheart. His eyes focused on her slowly, still glazed with whatever terror the nightmare had brought. Miss Amara? I'm here. Can I come closer? He nodded, and Amara closed the distance carefully, settling beside him on the plush carpet. Do you want to talk about it? The men, Luca whispered, fresh tears spilling over. The men who hurt Mama. They came back and Papa couldn't stop them, and his breath hitched with a sob. Oh, baby. Amara pulled him into her arms, and he came willingly, burrowing against her shoulder. It was just a dream.
Just a nightmare.
Your papa has made sure those men can never hurt you again. You're safe here. She held him while he cried, rocking slightly, murmuring reassurances in a mix of English and her clumsy Italian. Gradually, his sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shaky breaths. She kept talking, telling him about the constellations on his ceiling, about a Renaissance painting she'd authenticated that day, about anything that might anchor him back to the present, away from whatever horrors his mind had conjured. Will you stay? Luca asked finally, his voice small and exhausted. Until I fall asleep? Of course. Amara shifted to lift him. He was getting too big to carry easily, all gangly, 7-year-old limbs, and settled him back in his bed. She sat beside him, one hand stroking his hair while he clutched her other hand like a lifeline. It took nearly an hour before his breathing evened out into sleep, and even then Amara was reluctant to leave. She'd just started to ease her hand free when she heard footsteps in the
doorway.
Dante stood backlit by the hallway light, still in his travel clothes, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But his eyes were fixed on the scene before him, with an expression that made Amara's breath catch, raw vulnerability mixed with something deeper, something that looked almost like longing. Mrs. Chen called me, he said quietly, not moving from the doorway. I took the first flight back. Amara carefully extracted herself from Luca's grip, replacing her hand with his favorite stuffed elephant, and followed Dante out into the hallway. He closed the door softly behind them. Nightmare about his mother, Amara explained, keeping her voice low. He was terrified. I hope it was okay that I came. Thank you. Dante's voice was rough, and when he looked at her, Amara saw something crack in his controlled facade. I should have been here. I should have. Christ, I keep failing him. You're not failing him. You're giving him everything. Except what he needs most. A normal childhood. A mother. Safety, without armed guards. Dante ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically agitated. Do you want coffee? I don't think either of us will sleep now. They ended up in his private study, a room Amara had glimpsed but never entered. It was intimate in a way the rest of the house wasn't. Leather furniture worn comfortable with use. Bookshelves crammed with volumes in multiple languages. Family photos scattered among the art books. Dante poured them both coffee from a French press, his movements automatic then. Sank into the chair across from her with a heavy sigh. Her name was Julia, he said abruptly. My wife. We grew up together in the neighborhood. Married young. She knew what my family was, what I would become. She chose it anyway, said. She'd rather have a complicated life with me than an easy one without. Amara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, warmth seeping into her fingers as she waited for him to continue. The Vitali family wanted to send a message about territorial boundaries. They came to the house when I was away on business, my father's funeral in Sicily, ironically.
Julia Kaidi Lucain.
The closet tried to negotiate, to buy time until security arrived. His jaw clenched. They shot her. In front of our son's hiding place. He heard everything. Oh God, Amara whispered. Dante, I'm so. I destroyed them. His voice went flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow more terrifying than anger. Systematically, methodically. It took 6 months, but when I was finished, the Vitali family existed in name only. I made sure everyone understood what happened when you touched my family. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of violence and grief. Amara should have been horrified, and part of her was. But another part understood the terrible logic of his world, where strength was the only language certain people spoke. I was 9 when the FBI arrested my father, Amara heard herself say. Financial fraud, he'd been running a Ponzi scheme out of his accounting firm. Dozens of families lost their retirement savings. Some lost their homes. She stared into her coffee. I didn't understand why everyone suddenly hated us. Why my best friend's mother wouldn't let me come over anymore.
Why?
People spat at my mother in the grocery store. That's a heavy burden for a child, Dante said quietly. Marcus was only 5. He doesn't remember Dad the way I do, the bedtime stories, the Saturday park visits. He only knows the aftermath. Mom fell apart, so I had to hold things together. Made sure Marcus got to school, that bills got paid when I was old enough to work. Spent my entire adolescence trying to prove I wasn't like him, that I could be trusted, that I was more than just the fraudster's daughter. Is that why you became a curator? To surround yourself with beautiful, genuine things after being raised on lies. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. Maybe. Or maybe I just loved art.
My
Grandmother, before she passed, used to take me to the museum every Sunday. Free. Admission days. She'd say that humans create beauty even when everything else falls apart. That it was proof we're worth saving. Dante leaned forward, his dark eyes intent on her face. You know what I am, Amara. What I've
done.
And yet you're here at 3 a.m., comforting my traumatized child, drinking coffee in my study like it's the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it is, Amara said, though her heart hammered with the implications. Natural, I mean, for me. You see the monster and choose kindness anyway. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the quiet room. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How extraordinary. You're not a monster. The words came out more fierce than she'd intended. You're a man, trying to protect his son in an impossible situation. You're a father who flew home in the middle of the night because his child had a nightmare. She broke off as Dante stood, crossing the small distance between their chairs in 2 strides. He knelt before her, bringing them eye to eye, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. What am I, Amara? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me what you see when you look at me. Someone worth saving, she breathed, and then his hand was cupping her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The space between them dissolved. Amara could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, smell his cologne mixing with coffee and something uniquely him, feel the warmth of his breath against her lips as he leaned closer. His phone shattered the moment with an urgent, staccato buzz. Dante closed his eyes briefly, jaw clenching with frustration, then pulled back to check the screen. His expression shifted, instantly from intimate to lethal. I have to take this, he said, standing. It's Chiara. She wouldn't call at this hour unless, he answered, moving toward the window. What happened? Amara couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dante's body language shift, shoulders tensing, free hand curling into a fist. When he spoke, his voice was ice.
How?
Many of them? And our people?
Good.
Lock it down. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and turned back to Amara, and the man looking at her now was the one she'd heard on that business call weeks ago. Cold, controlled, dangerous. There's been an incident at one of my properties. I need to handle it. Chiara will drive you home. It's the Vitali family, isn't it? Amara interrupted. They're the ones you were on the phone with earlier. The ones who should have learned their lesson but apparently need a reminder. Dante's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. This is my world, Amara. This is what choosing me means. 3 a.m. calls and threats and violence always simmering beneath the surface. Are you sure you want any part of it? The honest answer was no. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away, to choose safety and respectability over this dangerous, complicated man. But when she thought about leaving, about never seeing Luca's smile again, never having these late-night conversations, never finishing that almost kiss, something in her chest ached with loss. I'm not sure about anything anymore, Amara admitted. Except that I'm not ready to walk away. Something blazed in Dante's eyes. Triumph, hope, fear, all mixed together. Then he was kissing her forehead, a gesture somehow more intimate than if he'd kissed her mouth. We'll talk when I
Get back.
try to get some sleep. But Amara didn't sleep. She went home as dawn broke over Chicago, her mind replaying every moment, every word, the phantom sensation of his hand on her face, making her skin tingle. She was standing in her kitchen, still in the clothes she'd thrown on hours earlier, when her doorbell rang at 9 a.m. expecting Marcus. She pulled open the door to find Chiara holding a flat package wrapped in brown paper. From Mr. Moretti, Chiara said, her expression unreadable. He asked me to deliver this. Personally. Inside the package was a small Renaissance Madonna and Child oil on panel, exquisitely rendered, the kind of intimate devotional work meant for private contemplation rather than public display. Amara recognized it immediately as the painting she'd spent nearly an hour examining last week, marveling at the artist's delicate handling of the Virgin's expression, tender and fierce simultaneously, a mother willing to defy heaven and hell for her child. The note attached was in Dante's precise handwriting. She reminded me of you. Courage, wrapped in compassion. I wanted you to have her. The gesture was too intimate, too personal, too significant to be just employer to employee. This was a man giving a woman something precious, something meaningful, something that spoke to truths they'd barely begun to articulate between them. Amara sank onto her couch, cradling the painting, and finally admitted what she'd been denying. For weeks, she was falling in love with Dante Moretti. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in love. With a man whose world was built on violence and loyalty in equal measure. And God help her, but she had no idea how to stop. The call came at 2:17 a.m., jarring Amara from restless sleep. She fumbled for her phone. Squinting at the screen, Dante's estate, the number Chiara had given her for emergencies. Hello. Her voice came out rough with sleep. Miss Thompson, I apologize for the late hour. It was Mrs. Chun, Luca's nanny, her usually calm voice threaded with stress. Luca is having a difficult night, nightmares, and he's asking for you specifically. Mr. Moretti is in New York on business, and I thought perhaps I'll be there in 30 minutes, Amara said, already throwing off the covers. She made it in 25, her heart pounding with more than just the urgency of the late night
Drive.
The security team waved her through the gates without question, and Mrs. Chun met her at the door with obvious relief. He won't let me near him, the older woman said, wringing her hands. He's not violent, just frightened. Calling for his mother, then for you. I didn't know what else to do. Amara found Luca in his bedroom, a space that should have been any child's dream, built-in. Bookshelves, a reading nook with cushioned window seats, glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged on the ceiling in actual constellations. But the boy himself was huddled in the corner, beside his bed, knees drawn to his chest, tears streaming down his face as he rocked slightly. Luca, Amara said softly, kneeling a few feet away. It's me. It's Amara. You're safe, sweetheart. His eyes focused on her slowly, still glazed with whatever terror the nightmare had brought. Miss Amara? I'm here. Can I come closer? He nodded, and Amara closed the distance carefully, settling beside him on the plush carpet. Do you want to talk about it? The men, Luca whispered, fresh tears spilling over. The men who hurt Mama. They came back and Papa couldn't stop them, and his breath hitched with a sob. Oh, baby. Amara pulled him into her arms, and he came willingly, burrowing against her shoulder. It was just a dream. Just a nightmare. Your papa has made sure those men can never hurt you again. You're safe here. She held him while he cried, rocking slightly, murmuring reassurances in a mix of English and her clumsy Italian. Gradually, his sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shaky breaths. She kept talking, telling him about the constellations on his ceiling, about a Renaissance painting she'd authenticated that day, about anything that might anchor him back to the present, away from whatever horrors his mind had conjured. "Will you stay?" Luca asked finally, his voice small and exhausted. "Until I fall asleep?" "Of course." Amara shifted to lift him. He was getting too big to carry easily, all gangly, 7-year-old limbs, and settled him back in his bed. She sat beside him, one hand stroking his hair while he clutched her other hand like a lifeline. It took nearly an hour before his breathing evened out into sleep, and even then Amara was reluctant to leave. She'd just started to ease her hand free when she heard footsteps in the
doorway.
Dante stood backlit by the hallway light, still in his travel clothes, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But his eyes were fixed on the scene before him, with an expression that made Amara's breath catch, raw vulnerability mixed with something deeper, something that looked almost like longing. "Mrs. Chen called me," he said quietly, not moving from the doorway. "I took the first flight back." Amara carefully extracted herself from Luca's grip, replacing her hand with his favorite stuffed elephant, and followed Dante out into the hallway. He closed the door softly behind them. "Nightmare about his mother," Amara explained, keeping her voice low. He was terrified. "I hope it was okay that I came." "Thank you." Dante's voice was rough, and when he looked at her, Amara saw something crack in his controlled facade. "I should have been here. I should have. Christ, I keep failing him." "You're not failing him. You're giving him everything. Except what he needs most. A normal childhood. A mother. Safety, without armed guards." Dante ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically agitated. "Do you want coffee?" "I don't think either of us will sleep now." They ended up in his private study, a room Amara had glimpsed but never entered. It was intimate in a way the rest of the house wasn't. Leather furniture worn comfortable with use. Bookshelves crammed with volumes in multiple languages. Family photos scattered among the art books. Dante poured them both coffee from a French press, his movements automatic then. Sank into the chair across from her with a heavy sigh. "Her name was Julia," he said abruptly. "My wife. We grew up together in the neighborhood. Married young. She knew what my family was, what I would become. She chose it anyway, said she'd rather have a complicated life with me than an easy one without." Amara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, warmth seeping into her fingers as she waited for him to continue. "The Vitali family wanted to send a message about territorial boundaries. They came to the house when I was away on business, my father's funeral in Sicily, ironically.
Julia Kaidi Lucain.
The closet tried to negotiate, to buy time until security arrived. His jaw clenched. They shot her. In front of our son's hiding place. He heard everything. "Oh God," Amara whispered. "Dante, I destroyed them." His voice went flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow more terrifying than anger. Systematically, methodically. It took 6 months, but when I was finished, the Vitali family existed in name only. I made sure everyone understood what happened when you touched my family. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of violence and grief. Amara should have been horrified, and part of her was. But another part understood the terrible logic of his world, where strength was the only language certain people spoke. "I was 9 when the FBI arrested my father," Amara heard herself say. Financial fraud, he'd been running a Ponzi scheme out of his accounting firm. Dozens of families lost their retirement savings. Some lost their homes. She stared into her coffee. "I didn't understand why everyone suddenly hated us. Why my best friend's mother wouldn't let me come over anymore.
Why
people spat at my mother in the grocery store. That's a heavy burden for a child," Dante said quietly. Marcus was only 5. He doesn't remember Dad the way I do, the bedtime stories, the Saturday park visits. He only knows the aftermath. Mom fell apart, so I had to hold things together. Made sure Marcus got to school, that bills got paid when I was old enough to work. Spent my entire adolescence trying to prove I wasn't like him, that I could be trusted, that I was more than just the fraudster's daughter. Is that why you became a curator? To surround yourself with beautiful, genuine things after being raised on lies. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. Maybe. Or maybe I just loved art.
My
Grandmother, before she passed, used to take me to the museum every Sunday.
free.
Admission days. She'd say that humans create beauty even when everything else falls apart. That it was proof we're worth saving. Dante leaned forward, his dark eyes intent on her face. You know what I am, Amara. What I've
Done.
And yet you're here at 3 a.m., comforting my traumatized child, drinking coffee in my study like it's the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it is, Amara said, though her heart hammered with the implications. Natural, I mean. For me. You see the monster and choose kindness anyway. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the quiet room. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How extraordinary. You're not a monster. The words came out more fierce than she'd intended. You're a man, trying to protect his son in an impossible situation. You're a father who flew home in the middle of the night because his child had a nightmare. She broke off as Dante stood, crossing the small distance between their chairs in 2 strides. He knelt before her, bringing them eye to eye, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. What am I, Amara? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me what you see when you look at me. Someone worth saving, she breathed, and then his hand was cupping her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The space between them dissolved. Amara could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, smell his cologne mixing with coffee and something uniquely him, feel the warmth of his breath against her lips as he leaned closer. His phone shattered the moment with an urgent, staccato buzz. Dante closed his eyes briefly, jaw clenching with frustration, then pulled back to check the screen. His expression shifted, instantly from intimate to lethal. I have to take this, he said, standing. It's Chiara. She wouldn't call at this hour unless, he answered, moving toward the window. What happened? Amara couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dante's body language shift, shoulders tensing, free hand curling into a fist. When he spoke, his voice was ice.
How?
Many of them? And our people?
Good.
Lock it down. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and turned back to Amara, and the man looking at her now was the one she'd heard on that business call weeks ago. Cold, controlled, dangerous. There's been an incident at one of my properties. I need to handle it. Chiara will drive you home. It's the Vitali family, isn't it? Amara interrupted. They're the ones you were on the phone with earlier. The ones who should have learned their lesson but apparently need a reminder. Dante's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. This is my world, Amara. This is what choosing me means. 3 a.m. calls and threats and violence always simmering beneath the surface. Are you sure you want any part of it? The honest answer was no. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away, to choose safety and respectability over this dangerous, complicated man. But when she thought about leaving, about never seeing Luca's smile again, never having these late-night conversations, never finishing that almost kiss, something in her chest ached with loss. I'm not sure about anything anymore, Amara admitted, except that I'm not ready to walk away. Something blazed in Dante's eyes, triumph, hope, fear, all mixed together. Then he was kissing her forehead, a gesture somehow more intimate than if he'd kissed her mouth. We'll talk when I
Get back.
try to get some sleep. But Amara didn't sleep. She went home as dawn broke over Chicago, her mind replaying every moment, every word, the phantom sensation of his hand on her face, making her skin tingle. She was standing in her kitchen, still in the clothes she'd thrown on hours earlier, when her doorbell rang at 9 a.m. expecting Marcus. She pulled open the door to find Chiara holding a flat package wrapped in brown paper. From Mr. Moretti, Chiara said, her expression unreadable. He asked me to deliver this. Personally. Inside the package was a small Renaissance Madonna and Child oil on panel, exquisitely rendered, the kind of intimate devotional work meant for private contemplation rather than public display. Amara recognized it immediately as the painting she'd spent nearly an hour examining last week, marveling at the artist's delicate handling of the Virgin's expression, tender and fierce simultaneously, a mother willing to defy heaven and hell for her child. The note attached was in Dante's precise handwriting. She reminded me of you. Courage, wrapped in compassion. I wanted you to have her. The gesture was too intimate, too personal, too significant to be just employer to employee. This was a man giving a woman something precious, something meaningful, something that spoke to truths they'd barely begun to articulate between them. Amara sank onto her couch, cradling the painting, and finally admitted what she'd been denying. For weeks, she was falling in love with Dante Moretti. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in love. With a man whose world was built on violence and loyalty in equal measure. And God help her, but she had no idea how to stop. They'd agreed to take things slowly, professional boundaries maintained, emotions acknowledged but controlled, a gradual integration of their lives rather than a reckless dive into the deep end. Amara still lived in her apartment, still kept her own schedule, still maintained the careful distance that let her pretend this was sustainable. That illusion lasted exactly 4 days. She was in Dante's gallery, authenticating a disputed Tintoretto, when her phone rang with Marcus's number. The time on the screen read 3:47 p.m., odd for her brother to call during his Thursday afternoon seminar. Hey Marcus, can I call you back? Is this Amara Thompson? The voice was wrong. Older, female, professional. This is Nurse Patterson from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Your brother was brought into the emergency department approximately an hour ago. He's stable, but... The rest of the words dissolved into white noise. Amara's legs went weak, and she gripped the edge of the workbench to stay upright. What happened? Is he was assaulted near campus. Multiple contusions, possible concussion, broken ribs. He's conscious and asking for you. How quickly can you get here? Amara was already moving, grabbing her bag and keys with shaking hands. 20 minutes. Tell him I'm coming. She made it to the gallery door before Dante appeared in the corridor, his expression shifting instantly from professional to alarmed as he took in her face. What's wrong? Marcus, hospital, someone hurt him. The words came out fractured, her composure crumbling. I have to go. I'm driving you. Dante was already pulling out his phone, issuing rapid instructions to someone. Chiara, get the car. Northwestern Memorial, now. The drive through Chicago traffic passed in a blur of terror and guilt. Dante's hand found hers, squeezing gently, but Amara couldn't feel it past the numbness spreading through her chest. This couldn't be random. Marcus was careful, smart, avoided trouble. This had to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message made her blood turn to ice. Tell Moretti we can reach anyone he cares about. Consider this a warning. Dante saw it too, his jaw clenching so hard she heard his teeth grind. He didn't say anything, but the silence in the car became suffocating, heavy with guilt and rage in equal measure. They found Marcus in a hospital bed, his face a mess of bruises and cuts, one eye swollen shut, his torso wrapped in bandages. But he was conscious, and when he saw Amara something in, his expression broke. I'm okay, he managed, though his split lip made the words come out slurred.
Mara, I'm okay.
Amara reached his bedside and took his hand carefully, afraid of hurting him, tears streaming down her face unchecked. What happened? Who did this to you? 3 guys jumped me outside the library. They didn't take anything, my wallet, phone. Everything's still here. They just... Marcus swallowed hard, wincing at the pain. They kept asking about you, about your new job, about the people you work for. When I wouldn't answer, he broke off, his good eye finding Dante standing in the doorway. This is because of him, isn't it? Because of you working for the mob? Marcus. Amara started, but her brother's expression hardened despite the bruises. I told you, he said, his voice thick with pain and anger and betrayal. I warned you this would
Happen.
that these people would drag you down, that getting involved with them was dangerous. But you didn't listen, and now, he gestured at himself, the evidence of her choices written across his broken body. I'm so sorry, Amara whispered, the guilt crushing her chest until she could barely breathe.
I'm so sorry.
Dante stepped forward, and Marcus tensed visibly. Mr. Thompson, I take full responsibility for what happened to you. This was meant as a message to me, and you became collateral damage. I will ensure it never happens again. Get out. Marcus's voice was cold despite the pain evident in every syllable. Get the hell away. From my sister before you get her killed too. The words hung in the sterile hospital air, brutal and undeniable. Dante's expression went carefully blank, but Amara saw the flash of anguish in his eyes before he masked it. I'll be outside, he said quietly to Amara, then left without another word. You need to leave him, Marcus said once they were alone. Pack your stuff, take my savings if you need to, and get away from that man before this gets worse. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Marcus gripped her hand with surprising strength for someone so beaten. These people don't play, Mara. They sent 3 guys to put me in the hospital as a warning. What's the next message? What happens when they decide to escalate? Amara had no answer, could only hold her brother's hand and feel the weight of her choices, pressing down like a physical force. She'd known the risks intellectually, had accepted them in the abstract. But seeing Marcus's battered face, feeling his fear and anger, and the very justified accusation in his eyes, that made it viscerally, horrifyingly real. She stayed with him until the painkillers kicked in, and he drifted into uneasy sleep, then found Dante exactly where he'd said he'd be, in the waiting room, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian in a tone that promised violence. I don't care how you do it, she heard him say. Find them. All 3. I want names, addresses, family connections, everything. By morning. He ended the call and turned to find Amara. Watching him, the mask slipped for just a moment, revealing devastation underneath. How is he sleeping? Doctors say he'll recover fully, but her voice broke. This is my fault. I chose to stay. I chose you, and now Marcus is paying the price for my decisions.
No.
Dante crossed to her, his hands hovering near her shoulders, but not quite touching, as if he'd lost the right. This is my fault. I knew the risks, I knew what associating with me meant, and I was selfish enough to want you anyway. Marcus is right, you should leave. Take him. Somewhere safe. Somewhere the Vitali family can't reach you. I'll make sure you're both protected, give you whatever money. Stop. Amara looked up at him, seeing her own guilt and fear reflected in his dark eyes. Just stop. Running now doesn't undo what happened. They already know about Marcus. Already. Know he matters to me. Moving him just makes him a moving target. Then I'll handle the Vitali family myself. Permanently. The cold rage in Dante's voice was terrifying in its quiet intensity. By this time tomorrow, they won't be a threat to anyone. And then what? The next rival family season opening? This is your world, Dante theirs. Always another threat, always another enemy waiting. Amara felt something harden in her chest, grief crystallizing into determination. They already made this personal. They hurt my brother to get to me, to get to you. So we don't run. We end this. Dante's eyes widened slightly. Amara, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. You told me I was in this, that I'd become a target by association. Well, they just proved that point by putting Marcus in the hospital. So either I'm actually in this, really in this, or I'm just a liability you're trying to protect.
Which is it?
The silence stretched between them, charged with implications neither of them could take back. Finally, Dante spoke, his voice rough. If you do this, if you cross this line, there's no going back. You stop being the civilian who got caught up in my world and become an active participant. That changes everything. They already changed everything when they touched my brother, Amara replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice despite the fury burning in her chest. So tell me how we make them.
Pay.
Dante studied her for a long moment, and she saw him making calculations, weighing risks, trying to protect her even now. Then his expression shifted into something harder, more decisive. Come with me. There are people you need to meet. The drive back to the estate was silent, both of them processing what had just shifted between them. When they arrived, Dante led her not to his study, but to a different wing of the house, one she'd never been allowed to enter. The security here was more obvious, reinforced. Doors, biometric scanners, armed guards who nodded respectfully as Dante passed. Inside was a command center that wouldn't look out of place in a corporate headquarters or military installation. Multiple screens showing security feeds, detailed maps of Chicago spread across a large conference table, and 3 people who stood when Dante entered. Chiara, you've met, Dante said, gesturing to his head of security. This is Angelo Marchetti, my strategist, and Vincent Rossi, who handles operational logistics. Everyone, this is Amara
Thompson.
As of today, she's to be read in on all matters related to the Vitali situation. The 3 exchanged glances that clearly communicated surprise, but no one questioned the decision. Chiara actually looked almost approving. The Thompson assault, Dante continued, his voice all business now. What do we know? 3 Vitali soldiers, Chiara reported, pulling up photos on one of the screens. Mid-level. Enforcers, probably following orders from Carlo Vitali himself. We have their locations, families, known associates. We can move tonight if you authorize it. Not yet. Dante studied the screens, his jaw tight. They want a war, but we're going to give them something else. What's the status on the Blackwell Museum situation? Angelo stepped forward, an older man with silver hair and calculating eyes. The underground auction is still scheduled for Saturday night. Intelligence confirms Carlo Vitali plans to attend. Personally, he's trying to acquire a Raphael sketch that supposedly came from the Vatican.
Archive.
His entire leadership will be there, along with buyers from 6 countries. Security will be tight but manageable. The Blackwell Museum? Amara interrupted, her mind racing. I know that building. I worked there briefly during grad school, helped with their catalog system. All eyes turned to her. Dante's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the question. Was she really willing to do this? The layout, Amara continued, moving to the table with the maps. The underground auction would have to be in the old conservation wing. It's not on any public tour, has separate entrance and exit points, and the room has no windows. If they're using it for something illegal, I can tell you exactly how they'd set it up. Security blind spots, access routes, even where they'd position guards. Silence greeted her words, heavy and assessing. Then Chiara smiled, sharp and dangerous. Boss, she's good. Dante was still watching Amara, and she held his gaze steadily, letting him see that she meant
This.
she wasn't the naive curator he'd hired anymore. The Vitali family had made sure of that. When they'd turned her brother into a message. Show us, Dante said finally. Show us everything you know about that building. As Amara leaned over the maps, pointing out architectural details and security vulnerabilities, she felt the last vestiges of her old life falling away. This was the price of loving Dante. Moretti, not just accepting his world, but entering it fully, using her knowledge as a weapon, becoming complicit in whatever came next. She thought of Marcus sleeping in that hospital bed, of the text message promising further violence, of Luca's nightmares about his mother's murder. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight transformed you into someone you'd sworn never to become. Here, she said, marking a location on the blueprint. This is where you'll find Carlo Vitalion. Saturday night. And this is how we make sure he never threatens anyone I love again. 48 hours. That's all they had before the Vitali family made their next move. And this time, Dante's intelligence suggested, the target would be Luca. The knowledge sat like ice in Amara's stomach as she spread architectural plans across the conference table, her curators. Identifying details that made Chiara nod with grudging respect. The conservation wing has 3 access points, Amara explained, tracing routes with her finger. Main entrance here, service elevator here, and an emergency exit that leads to the parking structure. If they're smart, they'll have guards at all 3, but the emergency exit is the weakest point. It's meant to be accessible from inside only, but the lock mechanism is old. Easy to bypass if you know what you're doing. Angelo made notes, his expression thoughtful. And the auction room itself. Former restoration studio. High ceilings, reinforced walls for climate control, only one way in or out once you're inside. They chose well. It's essentially a controlled environment, easy to secure. Amara looked up at Dante, who'd been watching her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. But that also makes it a trap if things go wrong. Once you're in, extraction becomes complicated. Then we don't let things go wrong, Dante said quietly. The planning sessions stretched late into both nights, Amara and Dante working side by side, while his team moved around them like a well-oiled machine. She learned the language of his world, clean exits and blind spots, distractions and pressure points. Learned to think like someone planning not an art exhibition but an operation where lives hung in the balance. You're a natural at this, Dante observed during a rare moment when they were alone, the rest of his team taking a break. It was nearly 3 a.m. and exhaustion had worn away their usual careful distance. Strategy, spatial thinking, staying calm under pressure. You would have made an excellent soldier. Or a criminal, Amara replied, unable to keep the bitter edge from her voice. Isn't that what I'm becoming? Planning illegal operations, helping you corner your enemies? My father must be so proud. Dante's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. Your father stole to feed his own ego. You're doing this to protect people you love. There's a difference. Is there? Amara looked at their joined hands, remembering Marcus's battered face. Because right now, it feels like I'm just finding more sophisticated ways to rationalize choices that would have horrified me 6 months ago. Then leave. Dante's voice was rough, painful. Walk away before Saturday, before you cross a line you can't uncross. I'll still handle the Vitali family, still make sure Marcus is protected. Stop trying to give me an out. Amara turned her hand over, lacing their fingers together.
I'm
here because I choose to be. Because I've fallen in love with you, despite every logical reason.
not to.
Despite knowing exactly what you are and what staying with you means. The confession hung between them, raw and irrevocable. Dante's dark eyes searched her face. As if looking for doubt, for hesitation, finding only exhausted certainty. "I fell in love with you the moment you stood between danger and my son," he said quietly.
This.
"Brilliant, brave woman who barely knew us, but decided we were worth the risk. I've spent 2 months trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was just gratitude or attraction or the novelty of someone who saw past my reputation. But it is real, Amara. Terrifyingly, inconveniently real." She kissed him then, or maybe he kissed her later. She wouldn't remember who moved first. Only that suddenly his hands were in her hair and hers were fisted in his shirt. 2 months of careful distance collapsing into desperate need. The kiss was fierce and almost angry, tasting of coffee and tension and all the words they'd been holding back. Dante pulled away first, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. "If we do this, if we cross this line—" "We already crossed the line," Amara interrupted. "The question is whether we're brave enough to see where it leads." He made a sound low in his throat, surrender and desire mixed together, and kissed her. Again, softer this time, but no less consuming. When he lifted her onto the conference table, scattering maps and blueprints, Amara laughed breathlessly against his mouth. "Your strategist is going to kill us for ruining his careful organization. Angelo can make new maps," Dante murmured against her neck, and then words became unnecessary. They made love surrounded by the tools of violence and strategy, transforming the war room into something else entirely, a space where two people who'd chosen each other despite impossible odds could pretend, for a few stolen hours, that consequences didn't exist. Afterward, tangled together on the leather couch, Dante traced patterns on her shoulder with gentle fingers. "If something goes wrong tomorrow," he started, but Amara pressed her fingers to his lips. "Nothing will go wrong. We have a plan, we have good people, and we have each other."
That's
Enough. She almost believed it. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Amara dressed in her gallery opening. Clothes, an elegant black sheath dress, and heels that looked appropriate for an art auction, while hiding the communication device Chiara had fitted against her spine. The earpiece was nearly invisible, tucked behind her hair, transmitting and receiving on a frequency only Dante's team could access. "Remember," Chiara said as she made final adjustments, "you're just a curator who received a legitimate invitation to view the Raphael. You attend, you observe, you give us the signal when Carlo Vitali and his key people are all in a room. Then you get out. And if something goes wrong," Chiara's expression was unreadable, "then you trust that the boss will move heaven and earth to get you out safely. He's already made that very clear to all of us." The Blackwell Museum looked different at night, imposing rather than welcoming, its neoclassical facade lit dramatically against the Chicago skyline. Amara presented her forged invitation to security, her heart hammering but her hands steady. The guard barely glanced at it before waving her toward the service entrance. The conservation wing had been transformed. Track lighting illuminated, select pieces arranged throughout the space, and perhaps 30 people mingled with champagne glasses, speaking in the hushed tones of serious money. Amara recognized several faces from her previous museum work, collectors, dealers, a few curators who probably had no idea half the items here were stolen or illegally exported. "Miss Thompson." The voice made her turn to find a man in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, smiling at her with practiced charm.
Carlo Vitale.
"I'm told you're an expert in Renaissance works. Perhaps you could give me your opinion on our star lot." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain distance from the man who'd ordered the attack on Marcus. But she was here to do a job, to be the bait that drew the predators into position. "I'd be delighted," Amara managed, letting him guide her toward the center of the room where a small sketch was displayed under museum-quality lighting. The Raphael was exquisite, a study for a Madonna, delicate lines showing the master's hand.
It
was also, Amara realized with growing certainty, stolen from the Vatican archives, just as Angelo had reported. Remarkable, isn't it? Carlos said, standing too close, his cologne cloying. Worth every euro we paid for it. Though I understand you recently left the museum world under rather unfortunate circumstances. Working for the Morettas now, I hear? The threat was barely veiled. Amara felt the communication device press against her spine. A reminder that she wasn't alone despite how exposed she felt. Mr. Moretti appreciates art, she replied carefully. As do you, apparently. I appreciate many things. Power. Loyalty. Knowing where my enemies are at all times.
Carlos.
Smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. Tell your employer that this city isn't big enough for both our organizations. He can choose to negotiate, or he can watch everything he cares about burn, including you. He already chose, Amara said, and gave the signal, touching her earring twice, the gesture. That looked like a nervous habit, but meant positions confirmed. All targets present, execute now. 4-3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the lights cut out. In the darkness, Amara heard shouting, the sound of bodies hitting the floor, Carlo's hand, gripping her arm bruisingly tight. You stupid bitch. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in red. Dante's people had moved with terrifying efficiency. Vitali's guards were down. Guests were being herded toward the exits by men and women Amara recognized from Dante's security team, and in the center of it all, Dante himself had Carlo Vitali pinned against the wall with casual, lethal strength. You made a mistake, Dante said, his voice carrying across the room despite its quiet tone. You touched my family, threatened my son, put a woman I love in danger. Each statement was punctuated by increased pressure, Carlo's face reddening. Now you're going to make a choice. Amara moved closer despite Chiara's warning gesture, needing to witness this moment that she'd helped orchestrate. Dante's eyes flicked to her briefly, checking that she was safe before returning to Carlo with renewed intensity. Option 1. You leave Chicago. Tonight. You take your remaining people and your operations, and you disappear. I keep the Raphael as compensation, and we never cross paths again. And option 2? Carlo managed, though fear was evident in his voice now. I make an example of you that ensures no one ever threatens my family again. Your choice.
Carlo.
But you have 30 seconds to make it. The silence was absolute, broken only by Carlo's ragged breathing. Finally, he nodded, a jerky, defeated motion. Chicago is yours, he said hoarsely. We'll be gone by morning. You have until dawn, Dante corrected, releasing him. One of your people is still in Chicago. After sunrise, this offer expires. Understood. Carlo nodded again, and Dante's team escorted him and his remaining associates out through the service entrance. In the emptied auction room, surrounded by stolen art and the evidence of violence barely avoided, Dante finally crossed to Amara. Are you hurt? His hands were gentle as they checked her arms, her face, looking for injuries.
Ai fine.
He just grabbed my arm, nothing serious. Amara looked around at the aftermath of their carefully orchestrated operation. Did we really just do that? You did that, Dante corrected. Your information, your courage, your signal. You saved Luca. Saved all of us. He cupped her face, his expression fierce and proud and terrified all at once. And you scare me half to death in the process. Then we're even, Amara replied, because I'm pretty sure I aged 10 years in the last hour. Dante kissed her then, not gentle but claiming, relief and fear and love all tangled together. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. Let's go home, he said. Luca's waiting. He made you something, wouldn't tell me what, said. It was a surprise for when you came back safe. Home. The word settled into Amara's chest, warm and right despite everything that had brought them here. She'd crossed every line she'd sworn never to cross, become complicit in violence. And illegal operations used her knowledge as a weapon. And somehow, impossibly, she'd never felt more like herself. The Vitali family was gone by dawn, just as Dante had demanded. Chiara's intelligence confirmed their convoy leaving Chicago at 4:47 a.m., heading east toward New York where Carlo's cousin controlled smaller operations. The threat that had hung over them for months dissolved like morning fog, leaving behind an unfamiliar sensation, safety. But other reckonings remained. Amara sat beside Marcus's hospital bed 3 days after the auction, watching him struggle with physical therapy exercises that made him wince despite the pain medication. The bruises had started to yellow at the edges, and the swelling around his eye had decreased enough that he
Could open it partially.
progress, the doctors said, though it would be weeks before he fully recovered. You're staring, Marcus said without looking at her, his voice still rough from the breathing tube. They'd removed yesterday. I'm worried about you. You should be worried about yourself. He finally met her eyes and she saw something complicated there. Anger, yes, but also grudging understanding. I've had a lot of time to think, lying here, about what you told me, about why you stayed with Moretti. Amara's throat tightened. Marcus. Let me finish. He shifted carefully, wincing at the movement. I was so angry at you for choosing him over safety over me. But then I kept thinking about that night at the museum. When you hid his kid. You didn't know who Dante Moretti was, didn't know what you were getting into. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped. That doesn't justify. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. Marcus reached for her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. You've spent your whole life being the responsible one, the safe one, trying to make up for Dad's mistakes. Maybe you needed to make your own mistakes for once. Even spectacularly dangerous ones. Are you saying you forgive me? Amara asked, hardly daring to hope. I'm saying I understand. There's a difference. His expression softened slightly. But yeah, eventually I'll forgive you. Especially since Moretti's paying for a security detail to follow me around campus until I graduate, which is both annoying and oddly comforting. Amara laughed through her tears, squeezing his hand carefully. He feels responsible. We both
Do.
He should. But Marcus's voice grew serious. If you're really doing this, really building a life with him, you need to do it right. No more half measures. No more keeping one foot in your old life. Either he's worth the risk or he isn't. The words echoed in her mind during the drive back to Dante's estate, where she found him in his study surrounded by legal documents and looking more stressed than she'd seen him face.
Down the Vitali family.
What's all this? She asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Legitimacy, Dante replied, gesturing at the paperwork with barely suppressed frustration.
Or
My attempt at it anyway. I'm restructuring the organization, shifting assets into legal enterprises, establishing proper import businesses using your authentication expertise, converting protection operations into licensed security consulting. Amara picked up one of the documents, scanning the dense legal language. This is ambitious. It'll take years. I know. Angelo thinks I'm being idealistic, that we can't completely disentangle from certain operations without losing essential power structures. Dante ran a hand through his hair.
but
When I think about Luca growing up, about what kind of legacy I want to leave him, and now, with you in my life, I can't keep justifying the old ways. Because of me? Amara asked quietly. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Dante came around the desk, kneeling in front of her chair. You risked everything to protect a child you didn't know. You stood up too. Armed men, participated in a dangerous operation, crossed every line you'd drawn for yourself, all to protect the people you love. That kind of courage deserves more than a man who profits from other people's vices. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Amara's breath caught. I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months. I know your brother is still in the hospital because of choices I made. Dante opened the box to reveal a stunning antique ring. Emerald-cut diamond in a platinum setting that looked like it belonged in a museum. But I've never been more certain of anything than I am about us. Marry me, Amara. Help me build something legitimate, something we can be proud of. Help me become the man you see when you look at me. Through tears that blurred her vision, Amara saw not just the ring but everything it represented. Risk and transformation, the death of who she'd been, and the birth of who she might become. Every rational part of her still screamed caution, but that voice had grown quieter. Over the past months, drowned out by something stronger. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, which, she learned later, it had been. Dante having it custom designed based on sketches he'd made during late-night planning. Sessions when he should have been focusing on strategy. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended cultures and histories, Italian traditions from Dante's family, touches from Amara's background, Marcus walking her down the aisle with a barely concealed limp that was almost gone. Lucas served as ring-bearer, his face solemn with importance, and when the priest pronounced them married, the boy's whoop of joy made the entire church laugh. But it was later, during a quiet moment at the reception, that Amara felt the full weight of her choice settle into place. She found Lucas standing alone on the terrace, looking out over the city.
Lights.
Hey, handsome, she said, settling beside him. Why aren't you inside dancing with all your cousins? I wanted to ask you something first. Lucas' voice was careful, measured in the way he had when emotions ran deep. Papa said I should ask if it's okay, that you might need time. Ask what, sweetheart? He looked up at her with those dark eyes so like Dante's, vulnerable and hopeful.
Can I call you Mama?
Not to replace my first mama. Papa says she'll always be my mama too. But you're here now and you love me and I love you, so maybe... He trailed off, uncertainty clouding his expression. Amara knelt down despite her wedding dress, pulling him into a fierce hug. I would be honored if you called me Mama. So incredibly honored. The transition took time, years of careful maneuvering as Dante systematically shifted operations toward legitimacy. The Moretti Gallery opened 2 years after their wedding, occupying a restored warehouse in River North that featured both Dante's private collection and rotating exhibitions of emerging artists. Amara served as director, her reputation in the art world gradually recovering as word spread about the gallery's ethical practices and scholarly rigor. Marcus finished law school and, to everyone's surprise, joined Dante's team of attorneys, handling the complex business transitions. Someone needs to make sure you're actually going legitimate, he'd said with a wry smile. Might as well be someone who has a personal interest in keeping my sister's husband out of prison. The hardest part was the waiting, knowing that true transformation couldn't happen overnight, that certain operations would take years to properly dissolve, that suspicions about Dante's past would follow them despite present legitimacy. There were investigations, uncomfortable questions from authorities, moments when Amara wondered if they'd ever truly escaped the shadow of what the Moretti organization had been. But there were also moments of pure joy, like when Dante came home from a meeting with federal prosecutors who'd finally agreed to drop their investigation, or when the gallery received a major grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, or when Marcus brought his girlfriend to Sunday dinner and she fit seamlessly into their complicated family. And then there was the morning Amara told Dante she was pregnant. They stood in the bathroom of their bedroom, the sun just rising over the lake, the positive test sitting on the counter between them. Dante's hands trembled slightly as he pulled her close. A daughter, he whispered against her hair. They'd just had the first ultrasound, learned the sex yesterday. Luca's going to lose his mind with excitement. He's already planning to teach her Italian and astronomy, Amara said, laughing through happy.
Tears.
I heard him telling Mrs. Chun his baby sister needs to know about the stars. Sophia arrived 8 months later, perfect and healthy, with Dante's dark hair and Amara's smile. Luca held her with exaggerated care, whispering promises in Italian about all the things he'd teach her, all the ways he'd protect her. Watching her husband and stepson fuss over their daughter, Amara felt something settle deep in her chest, not the absence of fear or doubt, but the certainty that she'd made the right choice despite all the wrong reasons along the way. The legitimate businesses flourished. The gallery became a Chicago institution. Marcus made partner at a prestigious firm. Luca grew into a thoughtful teenager who announced his intention to study art history, making both his parents tear up with pride. And slowly, year by year, the Moretti name became associated not with whispered rumors of organized crime, but with cultural philanthropy and business success. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still moments when Dante's past surfaced, when old enemies emerged or authorities asked uncomfortable questions. But they faced it, together building something real from the ruins of what had been. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked one night, years after that museum gala, as they lay in bed, with Sophia sleeping between them after a nightmare. Everything you gave up, everything you became? Amara looked at her sleeping daughter, thought of Luca in the next room, felt the solid warmth of Dante beside her. Not for a single moment, she said. You taught me that safety isn't the same as living. I finally understand what that means. The Moretti Gallery's 10th anniversary exhibition opened on a perfect autumn evening, the kind of night where Chicago's skyline seemed to glow with promise. Amara stood in the main hall. Watching guests circulate through the space she'd spent a decade building into one of the city's premier art venues, and felt the surreal disconnect of memory overlaying present reality. 10 years. A decade since that rainy night when she'd hidden a terrified child and unknowingly set her life on a completely different trajectory. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Other times it felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. Mama, the Art Institute director, is asking about the Caravaggio restoration, Sophia said, appearing at her elbow with the kind of poise that seemed impossible for a 9-year-old.
She
wore a navy dress that matched her father's tie, Dante's influence, that attention to coordinated detail, and had her dark hair pulled back in a style that made her look older than her years.
I
told her you'd be right over, but she seems very insistent. Thank you, sweetheart. Very professional. Amara smoothed her daughter's hair affectionately. Where's your father? With Luca, talking to the admission counselor from Yale. Again. Sophia rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. They've been discussing Renaissance studies programs for like an
hour.
It's so boring. Amara hid her smile. Sophia had inherited her father's intensity and her mother's compassion, but patience wasn't among her virtues yet. Go find Uncle Marcus. He was bringing someone special tonight he wants you to meet. As Sophia darted off with characteristic energy, Amara made her way through the crowd toward the Caravaggio that had just returned from restoration. She caught sight of Luca and Dante in deep conversation with the Yale representative, her stepson now 17 and devastatingly handsome in his formal suit, so much the image of his father at that age that it sometimes made her heart ache. He'd grown into a thoughtful, brilliant young man who spoke 4 languages fluently and could discuss art history with the kind of passion that made professors take notice. Miss Thompson, or should I say Mrs. Moretti? The Art Institute director smiled warmly. The restoration is extraordinary. How did you convince the Lombardi family to loan it for the exhibition? Patience and persistence, Amara replied, though the truth was more complex. Dante's connections in Italy had smoothed paths that would have taken years to navigate through normal channels. The organization might be legitimate now, but certain relationships remained useful, and perhaps the promise that we'd give it the scholarly attention it deserves. They discussed the technical aspects of the restoration, but Amara's attention kept drifting to her family scattered throughout the gallery. Dante had moved on from the Yale conversation and was now speaking with a group of collectors, his charm and sophistication giving no hint of the man who'd once run Chicago's underworld. These days, Moretti's security consulting handled high-end protection for museums, galleries, and private collectors throughout the Midwest.
The
art import business was completely legitimate, though it benefited from Dante's extensive international connections. Mostly reformed, as Marcus liked to joke. Reformed enough that federal investigations had been dropped, that business licenses came through without complications, that their children could grow up without the weight of their father's past defining their future. Marcus's voice carried across the gallery, and she turned to see her brother, approaching with a stunning woman at his side. He'd filled out, in the years since college, traded his student wardrobe for tailored suits that rivaled Dante's, though his smile was still the same, warm and slightly mischievous. This is Elena Vasquez. Elena, my sister Amara, the genius behind all this. Marcus talks about you constantly, Elena said, shaking Amara's hand. I'm starting to feel like I know the whole family already. She's exaggerating, Marcus said, but his expression had the softness Amara recognized. He was serious about this woman. Though I may have mentioned that my nephew's going to Yale next year, and that my niece is a tiny terror who thinks she can save every stray animal in Chicago. As if summoned by the description, Sophia reappeared looking guilty and determined in equal measure. Mama, there's a situation. What kind of situation? Amara asked, though she already suspected. There's a cat. Outside. By the loading dock. And it's limping and it looks hungry, and I know we said no more rescues after the turtle incident. But Mama, it needs help. Dante appeared beside them, having clearly heard the last part. Piccola, we've discussed this. You can't save every creature you encounter. But you and Mama always say that when someone needs help and we can give it, we help. Sophia argued, using their own words against them with devastating effectiveness. That's what makes us good people, right? Amara caught Dante's eye and saw him fighting the same smile she was suppressing. Their daughter had inherited not just their features, but their fundamental inability to walk away from creatures in need, a trait that had started everything between them. Go get the cat, Dante said with exaggerated resignation. But you're explaining to Mrs. Chen why we need yet another litter box. Sophia's squeal of delight drew smiles from nearby guests as she raced toward the loading dock. Marcus shook his head fondly. That kid is going to change the world or drive you both insane. Possibly both. She already does both, Amara said, but her chest was warm with pride. The evening wound down eventually, guests filtering out with promises to return for the next exhibition. The family gathered in Amara's office. Dante sprawled in the leather chair with Sophia, curled in his lap despite being too big for it, Luca reviewing the Yale materials with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Amara of herself at that age. Marcus and Elena talking quietly in the corner about weekend plans. You built something remarkable here, Dante said, gesturing at the space around them.
10
years ago, this was just an empty warehouse. Now it's part of Chicago's cultural fabric. You did that. We did that, Amara corrected. Your collection formed the foundation. Your business expertise kept us solvent when times were tight. Your connections. My occasionally questionable connections, Dante interjected with a wry smile, opened doors that would have stayed closed otherwise. Amara moved to perch on the arm of his chair, Sophia squirming to make room.
This is ours, Dante.
The good and the complicated. And everything in between. Luca looked up from his papers, his expression thoughtful, in the way that meant he was about to say something profound. Papa, do you remember that night at the museum? When I got lost? Every detail, Dante said quietly. I was terrified. More scared than I'd been since your mother. He broke off, old pain flickering across his face before smoothing away. I thought I'd lost you. But you didn't because Mama hid me. Luca used the name so naturally now after years of having two mothers, one in memory, one in daily life. She didn't know who we were, didn't know if it was safe, but she chose to help anyway. That's courage, right? Acting even when you're afraid. That's exactly what courage is, Amara agreed, touched by his insight. Then I want to be that brave, Luca said. At Yale, studying the things I love instead of what
People expect.
Maybe it's not as dramatic as hiding someone from danger, but it's still choosing the harder path because it matters. Dante's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at his son. You already are that brave.
Figlio.
Every day. Later, after Marcus and Elena had left and the children were finally asleep, Sophia with her rescued cat curled at the foot of her bed, Amara and Dante sat in their living room nursing glasses of wine and enjoying the rare quiet. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked suddenly, the question he'd posed variations of throughout their marriage. Hiding him that night, knowing everything that followed, the danger, the compromises, the life you could have had if you'd just stayed behind your counter at that museum gala? Amara looked around their home, at the family photos scattered across surfaces, at Luca's acceptance letter to Yale proudly displayed, at Sophia's artwork covering the refrigerator visible
Through the doorway.
Her gaze landed on the Renaissance Madonna hanging in the place of honor above the fireplace, the painting Dante had given her all those years ago. The Virgin's expression was still the same, fierce and tender simultaneously, a mother who understood that love required courage. I regret nothing, Amara said, the words carrying absolute certainty. You taught me that safety isn't the same as living. That some risks are worth taking even when they terrify you. That real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Dante set down his wine and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with the same fierce protectiveness he'd shown that first night. You saved my son. You saved me. You built a family from the ruins of my old life and made something beautiful from all the broken pieces. We built it together, Amara corrected, tilting her face up to kiss him. You, me, Luca, Sophia, even Marcus with his constant worrying and unsolicited legal advice. We're all the broken pieces that somehow fit together into something whole. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights through the windows, until Sophia appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, the rescued cat in her arms. I had a bad dream, she said, though her expression suggested this might be a convenient excuse to stay up later. Can I sit with you for a little while? Come here, Piccola, Dante said, making room for her between them on the couch. Sophia settled in with her cat purring loudly, and after a few minutes asked, Mama, why do people always say you saved Papa and Luca? What did you save them from? Amara exchanged glances with Dante over their daughter's head. They'd told the children age-appropriate versions of their origin story, carefully edited to remove the violence and
danger.
Sophia knew that her mother had helped her father find Luca when he was lost, that this act of kindness had brought their family together. The rest, the organized crime, the threats, the dangerous choices, would come later when she was old enough to understand complexity. I saved them from being alone, Amara said finally, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. And they saved me from the same thing. Sometimes that's what family means, saving each other from loneliness. Oh. Sophia considered this seriously. Like how I'm saving Midnight from being a stray?
She
held up the cat, who looked remarkably content for a creature who'd been limping around a loading dock hours earlier. Exactly like that, Dante agreed, ruffling his daughter's hair. You're very good at saving things, just like your mother. Later, after Sophia had finally been convinced to return to bed, Amara stood at the window looking out at Chicago's glittering skyline. Dante came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Do you think they'll understand someday? He asked quietly. When they're old enough to learn the whole truth, what I was, what we did, the choices that brought us here. I think they'll understand that love is complicated, Amara replied. That good people sometimes make morally gray choices for the right reasons. That transformation is possible but never simple. She turned in his arms to face him. And I think they'll see what I see when I look at you, a man who chose to be better than he was, who built something legitimate and lasting, who loves his family fiercely enough to change his entire world for them. Our entire world, Dante corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. No, Amara agreed with a soft smile. You couldn't have. But that's what partnerships mean, becoming more together than you ever could alone. She looked back at the Renaissance Madonna, thinking about that night a decade ago when everything had changed. One moment of courage, one choice to act when it would have been safer to look away, had cascaded into years of transformation, had built a family from impossible foundations, had proven that even the most dangerous beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. Some moments of courage echo across lifetimes, Amara thought, transforming everything they touch. That night in the museum archive, hiding a terrified child while armed men searched. She'd had no idea she was setting in motion a love story, a redemption arc, a complete restructuring of two lives that would have remained separate in any other timeline. But standing here now, wrapped in Dante's arms, listening to their children's peaceful breathing. From down the hall, looking at a home filled with art and love and hard-won legitimacy, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice again. Every time, without hesitation. Because some risks were always worth taking. Some moments of courage were always worth the consequences. And some families were worth building, no matter how dangerous the foundation. Come to bed, Dante murmured against her hair. Tomorrow Sophia has her soccer game, Luca has another college visit, and Marcus wants to bring Elena to Sunday dinner to officially introduce her to the family. As opposed to the unofficial introduction tonight? Amara laughed. He wants your blessing, I think. To make sure you approve before he proposes. He's going to propose? I've seen that look before, Dante said. He's as far gone as I was when I fell for you. Probably. Keeps the ring in his pocket just waiting for the perfect moment. They moved through the house, turning off lights and checking locks, the comfortable routine of a decade of marriage. In their bedroom, the city lights filtered through gauze curtains, casting soft shadows across familiar furniture. The Madonna painting was visible through the open door, still watching over them with her expression of fierce, protective love. Amara traced the outline of her wedding ring, that antique piece that Dante had chosen with such care that she'd worn through a decade of transformations and challenges and unexpected
joys.
The emerald-cut diamond caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling. I love you, she said simply, for asking me to stay, for trusting me with your son,
For
becoming the man you needed to be, for all of it. I love you for saving us, Dante replied. Both times that night in the museum and every day, since when you choose to stay despite having every reason to run. They fell asleep tangled together, and Amara's last thought before drifting off was of Sophia's rescued cat, of Luca's courage in choosing his own path, of Marcus finding love with someone who saw past their family's complicated history, of Dante's slow transformation from dangerous to devoted, of one champagne glass shattering on marble floors, one child hiding in shadows, one woman choosing courage over caution. Some moments echo forever, she thought drowsily. Some choices reshape entire destinies.
And
sometimes danger becomes home when you're brave enough to stay. Outside, Chicago slept beneath its blanket of stars. Inside the Moretti house, a family built from impossible circumstances dreamed of bright futures. And on the wall, a Renaissance Madonna kept watch, her painted eyes holding the same truth Amara had learned all those years ago. That love, real, transformative, dangerous love, was always worth the risk. Always worth the
fear.
always worth whatever price courage demanded. Every single time. Thank you for sticking with this story until the very end. If you enjoyed this journey through moral complexity and difficult choices, subscribe so you never miss another one. We've got more stories about people navigating impossible situations, making hard choices, and discovering that change is messy but possible. I'll see you in the next story.